We've all asked ourselves the big questions at some point, right? Why are we here? Is there a purpose to all of this? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive into how the Quran makes its case for a creator. And what's really interesting is that it's not about demanding blind faith. Instead, it's an invitation to follow a trail of evidence.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at this core idea, this invitation to use our own reason. Then we'll explore three major signposts of evidence: the universe itself, what's going on inside of us, and the Quranic text. And finally, we'll see what kind of logical conclusion this trail of evidence leads to.
All right, first things first, the invitation to evidence. The central theme here is that belief isn't presented as some top-down command. It's framed as an intellectual journey, a conclusion you arrive at through your own observation and thinking.
And that really brings us to the core question here. Is belief just a blind leap into the dark, or is it a logical step, one that's actually grounded in evidence? The argument we're digging into today makes a really strong case for it being the second one.
Now, this entire way of thinking really hinges on the principle you see right here: no compulsion in religion. And the idea is pretty profound. For faith to be real, to be meaningful, it absolutely has to be a choice. Think about it. If a creator's existence were as obvious as, say, gravity, there'd be no choice to make, and the whole point of free will would kind of be lost. This verse, this is the bedrock for the whole argument. It says it right there in black and white: no forcing, no coercion. The right path has been made clear from the wrong one. But the choice to actually walk that path is left up to each individual. This really sets the stage for a search for evidence, not a demand for submission.
Okay, check out this analogy. It's pretty powerful. Scientists can't travel back in time to watch the Big Bang happen, right? But they are certain it did happen because they can study its echoes, things like cosmic microwave background radiation. Well, the argument here is that a creator can be understood in a similar way, not by seeing them directly, but by examining the signs or the echoes of design and purpose woven into the very fabric of the universe.
So that brings us to our very first signpost: the evidence we can find just by looking up at the incredible, vast cosmos. The first piece of evidence from the source is this verse. It describes an origin point where everything, the heavens and the earth, was once a single joint entity, and then it was separated.
And this is where things get really interesting. Look at this side by side. On one hand, you have that 7th century description of a joined entity. On the other, you've got the 20th century scientific theory of the Big Bang, the idea that the entire universe exploded from a single infinitely dense point. That similarity, that resonance between the two, is highlighted as a major piece of evidence.
But it doesn't stop there. The cosmic evidence continues with this verse, which talks about building the heaven with power, and then says, "And indeed, we are its expander." This is presented as a clear reference to the ongoing expansion of the universe, something scientists only confirmed over 1,000 years later.
And then there's this mind-bending concept: cosmic fine-tuning. The basic idea is that the fundamental rules of our universe, things like the force of gravity or the charge of an electron, are balanced on an absolute razor's edge. I mean, if you changed any of them by just a tiny, tiny fraction, poof, no stars, no galaxies, no life. This unbelievable precision is put forward not as some cosmic coincidence, but as a sign of deliberate, intelligent design.
Okay, so we've looked at the staggering scale of the cosmos. Now, the next signpost asks us to zoom all the way in, to the evidence we can find right inside of ourselves.
This verse really sets the tone for this whole section. It basically turns our gaze inward and asks a really direct question. And in yourselves, then will you not see? The suggestion is that the signs of a creator aren't just out there in the stars, but they're also right here, within our own being.
And here's a really practical example of that: the Quran's detailed account of how an embryo develops. The text describes these very distinct stages, from the initial gametes to a leech-like clinging mass, all the way to the formation of bones that are then clothed with flesh. To have this kind of precise sequence described in the 7th century is presented as evidence of knowledge that was way beyond the scientific reach of the time. But the evidence isn't just physical or biological, it's also about what's going on inside our minds. We're talking about the deep mystery of consciousness itself, that innate moral compass we all seem to have, and that universal human search for meaning and purpose. The source points to a Quranic verse that says the soul is inspired with an understanding of both good and evil, another sign pointing towards a divine source.
So, after looking at the cosmos and looking at ourselves, we get to the third and final signpost, the Quran itself. The argument here is that the book is its own form of evidence.
And this is where the text basically throws down a challenge. It openly invites you to analyze it, to scrutinize it. It says, hey, if this was from any other source, you'd find all sorts of contradictions. The very fact that it holds together, despite being revealed over 23 years, is presented as a sign of its divine origin.
And this claim of divine authorship is backed up by a few key arguments. First, its incredible coherence across 2 decades of revelation. Then, there's its historical preservation. It's remained unchanged for over 1,400 years. You've also got its world-changing impact, and finally, what's described as a unique and inimitable literary style. The idea is that when you put all these pieces together, they point to a non-human author. So we've looked at the evidence from the cosmos, from within ourselves, and from the text itself. Now let's bring it all together and look at the logical conclusion that's drawn from these 3 signposts.
And this is an absolutely crucial distinction. The argument isn't trying to offer a mathematical proof, like 2 + 2 = 4. It can't be that simple. Instead, it's about a logical inference. It's the idea that when you take a step back and look at all the signs together, the most rational, the most logical conclusion is the existence of a purposeful, supreme intelligence.
It's also really important how this inferred creator is defined. We're not talking about a figure that looks or acts human. As the slide says, it's described as the ultimate reality, a being of absolute power, knowledge, wisdom, and justice, completely beyond any of our human limitations.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with the question. This whole approach isn't about forcing belief. It's about presenting a path of inquiry. It lays out a trail of evidence and invites you to think, to reflect. So the final question, really, is a personal one for anyone who's curious. Where might that journey of following the evidence leave you?